I'm John Blair. I'm a professor over in the Department of English, and I've known Scott Johnson forever. I've known Scott Johnson. I was reading the blurb in the newspaper about him, said that he'd graduated from here in 2002, and I thought to myself at the time, that means I've known Scott for 12, 14 years now. And of course, the thought that immediately followed that was, gosh, we're old. And not getting any younger, I'm afraid. When you're a genre writer in the academy, which I am, of course Scott doing horror fiction, I'm a science fiction guy, or have been a science fiction guy in the past, you tend not to get a lot of respect. You tend to be marginalized a little bit. But you know, one of the things the great they always say is there's no greater revenge than success, and Scott certainly had that. As I'm sure if you're here, you know that. 10 plus books, 100 plus articles, and just lots and lots and lots of people reading every word he writes, which of course is what you want when you're a writer. I don't know about you, but I'm very much looking forward to hearing what it is he's going to read to us today, because he hasn't told me yet. But anyway, the man of the hour, Scott Johnson.
Holy cow, there's people. Before I get started, I want to say, when I started here, when I was an undergraduate here, was when I started writing, and there were two professors in particular that encouraged me, and so you can feel free to blame me on them. The first one, and these are two fellows that were the first people that made me feel like that the stories that I had in my head were actually worth anything. And the first one was Miles Wilson, who for some reason didn't scream and run out of the room when he read my first short story that was about a guy who woke up in the middle of the night and found his whole family been butchered. It's for the kids. The second professor that really encouraged me and was a real mentor to me was Professor Blair here, John, and I can't think of anybody better to have been the person to introduce me for this, because without you and without Miles, there's no way in hell I'd be standing up here right now. So, what I would like to read to you today are some excerpts from the series that I'm working on now, the Stanley Cooper Chronicles. And just to give you a little bit of backstory, Stanley was a normal, average, everyday guy until he died in a fall. Was declared legally dead for 3 minutes. And when he came back, he could see dead people. So, I hope you enjoy it. And this is from the first book. This is from Vermin. And then after I get done with this, I'll read a little bit out of the second book, Pages. The harness fit tight, and that was good. It meant the nylon straps had me by the legs and back, safe as a baby in his mother's arms. Below me, open air yawned to a backstop of concrete. My feet pressed against the glass, and I leaned into the comfort of my web cradle and raised my caulking gun. 75 panes down, 500 more to go. I heard a snap, a metallic ping, and then my world went topsy-turvy. The wind whistled in my ears as my stomach tried to climb up my throat and out of my mouth, and I didn't have time to think, didn't have time to react. There wasn't even time to breathe. I'm pretty sure my heart stopped beating. I felt the first gulp from my pulse, and then I swear there was nothing after that. The cable got smaller as I fell away, and all I could think was, not now. Not like this. My birthday's next week, for Christ's sakes. I can't. And then my telephone woke me up from the nightmare. It's the same damn dream I'd had every night for the last 5 years, falling from 30 feet up and coming down hard. I've had the dream so often that I don't wake up screaming anymore. I wake up, wipe the sweat off my face, and go about my business. It's pretty amazing what a person can get used to. I cleared my throat and pulled the receiver off the nightstand. Hello? Is this Stanley Cooper? The voice on the other end of the line was female, shaking and scared. Yeah, this is Cooper, I yawned. A call from some random stranger wasn't exactly how I wanted to start my day. Mr. Cooper, Now look, I get stammering phone calls a lot. For some reason, people feel embarrassed about calling for certain kinds of help. No one feels embarrassed about calling a doctor or a priest, but for some reason, people feel nervous about calling people like me. Like maybe the neighbors will hear and think they're crazy or something. Something I can do for you, miss? My tone must have put her off, or at least let her know that I was tired of the stuttering bit. Lack of sleep makes it hard for me to mask my morning grumpies. I'm sorry, she said. This was a mistake. I thought since you helped the McNeils. The McNeils. That name made my stomach roll and my eyes snap open. Memories of yellow eyes and a voice that didn't belong to a 12-year-old girl flashed through my mind. Hold on, I said. Don't hang up. I cupped my hand over the receiver and sat down on the edge of my bed, cleared my throat a couple of times, and picked up the pen and pad from beside the telephone. Ma'am, are you still there? There was silence on the line while she debated hanging up. I'm here, she said. How can I help you? I don't want to discuss this over the phone, she said. Yeah, no one ever did. Everybody preferred to meet face to face. Can you meet me at the Carnegie Library in an hour? Sure, I said. You didn't tell me your name. Shannon, she said. I'll be waiting by the main entrance. And the line went dead. Philosophers and songwriters often write about finding the silver lining in every cloud, the good and the bad, that sort of thing. I'm not talking about real philosophical geniuses here like Plato or Ozzy Osbourne. I'm talking about pop philosophers like Dr. Phil or people who write show tunes. Yeah, essentially they're made up of the same type of Pollyanna people. On one side of the coin are people who point out that there's a slight amount of tragedy in every good thing that happens. We found a cure for cancer, but think of all the poor test animals who died to find it, that sort of thing. Optimist on one side, pessimists on the other. And that leaves people like me somewhere in the middle. I died. And I got better. It's really the only way I can describe my situation. See, both good and bad came from my untimely passing. The good news came in the form of a check from the company that killed me. It was enough that I didn't really have to work again if I didn't want to. Not enough to live in luxury, but enough to buy an apartment in Pittsburgh, pay off my car, and afford cable, and maybe a few other creature comforts. For anything else, I needed a steady income. Not much, but enough to support my video game habit and keep me in imported horror movies. Oh, and did I mention I also see dead people? I'm not sure if that's a good point or a bad point, really, but it's a fact. It isn't as if I see cadavers everywhere I go. It's more like I walk into a place and every restless soul that's ever died there comes out to meet me. I'm pretty sure it has something to do with my own passing and returning from the other side, like they want to meet the guy who made it out or something. The trouble is, most of them look exactly like they did when they died. It doesn't make for very happy dinner conversation. I don't advertise my abilities. I never hung a shingle out by the roadside or put an ad in the yellow pages. People pass me on the street all the time and never bat an eye. But people find me all the same. A friend of a friend, an acquaintance of a former client. Somehow they all find me and they all ask for my help. And when a person comes to me, quaking in fear and begging for my help, I can't turn them down. For the most part, they're looking for closure, or they want someone to tell them that their house is haunted by more than banging pipes and faulty wiring. Still, every now and again, someone finds me who really needs help. Someone like the McNeils, or maybe this Shannon person. So the Carnegie Library is the second most popular place where people like to meet me. The first is a bar on Carson Street called the Copper Tank. They usually choose the tank because there are so many people that there's so many people there that they're likely to be unnoticed. They choose the library for the same reason. I prefer the tank because the library doesn't serve beer. But some folks are more comfortable surrounded by musty books than by hormonal college students. Go figure. So I came up from the parking garage into the cold February air and I saw her straight away. A long black winter coat pulled tight around her shivering frame, hair coiffed just perfectly in a high golden mound, and makeup done to perfection. It matched the quivering voice on the telephone. I could also tell she hadn't clue one of what I looked like. Every time she saw a tall, muscular fella pass by, she looked as if she wanted to introduce herself. The hero type, that's what she expected. With just the right mix of brawn and beauty. It'd be a serious disappointment. Unlike the movie heroes who were built like college athletes and have charming smiles, I'm short, a little dumpy. I don't have chiseled features, but a round face with a pixie nose that looks sharp enough to cut glass. My hair isn't quite long enough to pull back yet, but it is too long to be manageable, which gives me a crazed look even when the wind isn't blowing. A blustery day in February makes me look positively deranged. I pulled my coat snug against the wind and made my way quickly to the woman. "Are you Shannon?" As the woman turned to face me, her face melted into a mask of horror. "I don't have any money," she shrieked. "Get away from me!" "Mr. Cooper?" I turned away from the recoiling woman to see a younger girl in fatigue pants and sneakers rising from the bench. Her sandy blonde hair was pulled back from her face in a loose knot, revealing freckles and lines of worry. Over her Duquesne University sweatshirt, she wore a Navy surplus peacoat. I turned back toward the other woman, who seemed to regard me with more disgust than fear. "Excuse me," I said. "Mr. Cooper, you must be Shannon. Hi, Stan Cooper." "Can we go inside?" she said. The way her eyes darted around, it was as if she were afraid she was being watched. "It's cold out here." I shrugged and gestured for her to lead the way, and once inside, she made her way into a private study carrel and closed the door behind her. "I don't really know where to begin," she said. I don't even really believe in all this stuff myself." "Why don't you just tell me what's going on?" "I feel like I'm losing my mind is what's going on," she said, a mixed laugh and sob catching in her throat. "I think my house is haunted, but it's more than that. There's something weird going on there." As I watched her face, I saw a strong young woman driven down by something she couldn't understand. The color under her eyes showed she hadn't been sleeping well. Her hands shook with fatigue. Somebody else might have thought she was a meth head on detox, but I saw her for what she really was, out of her element and terrified. Hey, I took her hand in mine. "You don't have to worry about me not believing you, okay? Just tell me what's going on." It took an hour for her to spill the whole story. She was a student, which I probably could have figured out on my own. She and a group of classmates decided to get a house together to save on expenses. They pooled their resources and managed to buy a rundown house on the south side. There were 5 of them living together, sharing rooms, and then things started disappearing. That was their first clue that something was wrong. And then there were noises and other signs. She said her roomies were starting to act strange and that she was beginning to feel ill. In fact, they all started skipping classes and just staying inside the house. I asked her why she didn't leave. "I have to stay," she said. "Yeah, but why?" "I have to stay." Her tone was the same one an abused woman had when she refused to leave her lover. She knew it was bad, but there was something keeping her there. Something unexplainable. I agreed to follow her to the house and get a first impression of what was going on. It takes a lot of guts to come forward when something weird or frightening happens to a person. Most people feel like no one will believe them or that people will blame them and laugh behind their backs, and most people are right. It leaves people with a sense of hopelessness that there's nowhere left to turn. When people begin to feel that way, those dark forces win. I don't mean that metaphorically, I mean it literally. They win a victory, a conquest over a soul when a person loses hope. Someone experiencing what Shannon claimed to experience has to be at wit's end to find somebody like me. Most of the time they dummy up and don't tell anyone, but when it first happened to me and I thought I was losing my mind, sure, I mentioned it to a few people. A shrink here and there, a few friends, a bartender or two. My friends stopped hanging out with me. The bartenders cut me off, and the shrinks told me I was suffering from some sort of post-traumatic stress syndrome brought on by my passing. They never say death. They always say passing. Passing sounds so much nicer, much less final than death. Passing sounds like something a person might do when walking between 2 rooms. It doesn't sound like what happens when a piece of safety equipment fails due to production cutbacks, dropping the person 30 feet onto the back of their heads. It doesn't bring to mind waking up on a gurney with a sheet over your head and a paper toe tag on your toe. That's not passing. That's dead with a capital D. But good things came out of it, though. I mean, I developed a new respect for people that I might have thought were crazy before. I also quit drinking and smoking. I've heard of so many people who've had near-death experience who come away and say, "Live for the now," and say things like, "I've been dead, so nothing scares me." Yeah, well, frankly, the thought of dying and not coming back scares the ever-loving hell out of me. People talk about seeing the long corridor with light at the end or seeing dead relatives. When I died, I saw nothing. I saw darkness. I didn't even get to float up above my own body or relive my life and fast forward. All I saw was black. All I saw was cold. People say they don't believe in magic or ghosts. They call people like me or my friend Maggie delusional and say that we're living in a fantasy world. Magic isn't real, they say, and there's no such thing as ghosts. They go along their happy daily routine, safe and secure in the knowledge that the unexplainable things or things that go bump in the night just aren't real. These are the same people who are the ones that avoid shops like Maggie's or who watch me as if I might do something spooky. And they're also the first ones to turn around and scream and run if so much as an odd noise is heard in an old, dark, creepy house. They say they don't believe, but it's a lie. See, the trouble is they do believe. They just don't take the time to understand. They believe, but they'll never admit it to each other because that would let in the possibility that there are things in the world that don't fit in with their neat little model of what life is supposed to be. In the light of day, it's easy to say there's no such thing as ghosts or possession or haunted houses. But in the dead of night, tucked in bed, hiding beneath blankets, while the sound of footsteps cross the floor and the sounds of breathing come from under the bed, everyone believes. So that's the first part of Vermin, Book 1 of the Stanley Cooper Chronicles. Thank you. I should explain who Maggie is since I mentioned her and I forgot to do that before. Maggie owns a shop on Carson Street and she is a practicing witch. So, yeah, there's that. The beginning of Pages is, I just want to read the first part of the beginning of the second book of the Stanley Cooper Chronicles, Pages. The tiny brass key fit in the lock and I held my breath. I could tell by how difficult it was to turn that what lay behind the door was bad, very, very bad. Images snapped through my mind of what could lay inside, and although I knew snakes and rats wouldn't be hiding in my mailbox, somehow I found them preferable to the avalanche of mail that greeted me as I swung the door open. Half the pile fell to the floor while the other half remained wedged in the tiny rectangular compartment. With a groan, I stooped and gathered what fell and then went through the arduous task of freeing my letters from their aluminum prison. I hadn't spent too much time at my apartment recently. There were too many memories of horrible things that still plagued me like phantoms and too many faces that stared at me as I walked down the halls. Only a few of those faces belonged to living people. The rest died a little over a year ago, but I still saw them. It took me a while to convince myself that it wasn't my fault, that the monsters that tore them apart weren't my doing. But in the back of my mind, a little voice kept telling me that if I hadn't poked my nose where it didn't belong, those people would still be alive. I gathered the awkward pile and headed down the hall. The old elevator rumbled and creaked as I rode up, and the building was breathing again. It made me smile. When I reached my door, I kept my eyes down on the pile of mail and read the names on all the envelopes. Most of them were addressed to current resident or our good neighbor at, but a few carried Stanley Cooper on their faces, and most of those were bills, I guessed. Keeping my eyes down wasn't just a way to catalog what the postman delivered, and it wasn't because I was unfriendly. I had to keep my eyes down. That's what people do when they see ghosts everywhere. Or at least that's what I imagined they would do. If there were more of them but me. And while my building wasn't the most haunted spot in Pittsburgh, it did have more than its fair share of disgruntled spirits. Most of them crossed over a week or two after the bodies died, but a few of them just couldn't let go. And at least 2 of them still blamed me for getting them killed. Lucky for me, they didn't have the kind of power to do more than just stare at me as I walked down the hall, so I kept my head down and pretended not to notice. When I reached my door, I juggled the key in my mail until I managed to get the door unlocked. The air inside smelled stale, musty, like old laundry. I looked around at my belongings and realized just how much I missed this place and just how long I'd been away this time. Now, my apartment wasn't much to look at, but it did have its advantages. Sure, the bedrooms were tiny and the galley kitchen was barely big enough to accommodate a single butt. There was only 1 bathroom and the laundry facilities were deep in the bowels of the building, but my apartment was one of the safest places I knew for someone like me. I don't mean it was burglar-proof, though it did have a steel fire door and there were cameras set up in the hall. Along every wall, every opening, across the ceiling and under the carpets were Latin words and strange symbols inscribed by me with a silver paint pen. The same was true all around the electrical outlets, phone jacks, even the faucets, and they all said more or less the same thing. Keep out. Nothing negative could enter my apartment because of the wards. Ghosts couldn't just walk in and surprise me in the shower either. Of course, that didn't mean they couldn't stand on the other side of the wall and whisper, which they did sometimes, though not as much as they used to. As time passed and repairs on the building were made, they started crossing over, moving on, whatever. A year after every tenant in the building had been wiped out in a brutal massacre, families were starting to move back in, and the whispers weren't so bad anymore. I closed the door, sat down on the couch, and started sorting through my mail. Junk bills, sale flyers and coupons. Same things I always got, until I came across a large padded manila envelope. When I touched it, my skin tingled as if there were batteries attached to the inside of whatever was in it. The tattoo on my wrist itched and like it wanted to crawl away from the parcel. Crawly skin art, by the way, on the average person might not be something to write home about, but for me it was a reason to take notice. My tattoo isn't just a random picture, it's a sigil. It's a shield with enough energy forced into its knotty lines to protect me from all things nasty. It comes in handy from time to time. When it itches, there's bad things nearby. I turned the package over in my hands. On the front, written in black magic marker, was my name, Stanley Cooper. There was no address, no stamp, no signs whatsoever that had been through the postal service. How it got into my mailbox, I couldn't even begin to guess. Now, to most people, unsolicited parcels in the mail might seem odd. In this day and age, most people would probably panic and call the police for fear of getting an anthrax Valentine or an exploding love note. Me? I can't say I'm used to getting strange things slipped magically into my mailbox, but it has been known to happen. It's part and parcel of being what I am. I pulled the tear strip off the top of the envelope and reached inside. Whatever it was, the person who sent it wrapped the contents in plastic. The anthrax theory was starting to seem not so far-fetched. When I pulled the plastic out, I just stared. What I held looked like pages torn from a very old book. Hence the title of the book, Pages. Get that? The words were in a language I didn't recognize, and the ink was faded to a dull brown. But that wasn't what drew my attention. On the top page was a graphic depiction of a human body cut open and splayed with every vital organ tagged and labeled. I didn't bother unwrapping the pages, but tucked them back into the envelope and left them on the couch while I went to shower and change. There are lots of names for people like me. Most of them aren't very nice. I've been called crazy, psychotic, out of touch, spooky. I've been called clairvoyant and psychic. My best friend calls me a necromancer, whatever that means. I tend to think of myself as cursed, depending on the day. Whatever people call me, their meaning is always the same. I see dead people. See them. Talk to them. Sometimes I can't get away from them. I can also see the energy that surrounds all living things, auras, some people call them. It's not something I was born with or even wanted, but just something that sort of happened after I died. You heard me right, I died. I fell from a building and took the last great step toward oblivion. Then for whatever reason, I got better. I don't know why or how, but here I am. And my life has been pretty weird ever since. As I drove down Carson Street, I marveled at all the construction going on. It wasn't long ago that most of the buildings were gutted and many of the shop owners were injured or killed. Where the buildings used to glow with love and life that their tenants poured into them, they were empty husks, holes in the scenery. But the people on Carson Street were a special kind. More than any of Pittsburgh's natives, the Carson Street vendors were hearty. The quirky shops on the street were more than their livelihoods, they were their lives. Just over a year later, and the shops already had healthy, vibrant energies. And that told me that whatever the denizens of Carson Street were, they weren't quitters. After so much destruction, seeing the area not just come back to life, but thrive, made me smile. I turned a corner and pulled around the back of one of the buildings until I came to a large red sign that said, "Employees and brooms only. Violators will be towed." Ribbit. I pulled my Chrysler up in front of the sign and parked, and as I picked up my bag in which sat the envelope, I shuddered. The block was bustling by the time I rounded the corner and made my way to the front of the building. Across the street, large signs proclaimed the purpose of the shops, and wide windows displayed their wares. Rock Rags, which sold pre-torn jeans and concert t-shirts, along with bongs and jewelry, stood just down the street next to a secondhand bookstore and a deli, from which the luxurious scent of soup wafted. Next door was a 3-story shop that sold nothing but vintage toys, some of which from before I was born. But the shop I headed to had no sign. The windows in front were so dark that most people didn't realize they were there. The only thing that marked its door was a symbol, 2 crescent moons with a full moon in between them. "Stan," Maggie called as I opened the door. "Is that you?" "Nope. It's the boogeyman come to steal your virtue." "You're a little late for that," she said as she came through the back curtain, "but I'll give you whatever I've got left." She was dressed in black sweatpants that hugged her legs and a t-shirt that didn't hug anything. Her long red hair was tied up with a purple scarf that hung loose over her shoulders. She was barefoot, as she usually was inside the shop, and for some reason that just made her all the more beautiful to me. Maggie wasn't one of those string bean supermodel waifs. She had curves, like women should, and was not afraid to show them off. Her confidence radiated off her so that despite her stature, no one doubted she was a woman of considerable strength. Not to mention the fact that she was a practicing, honest-to-goodness spell-slinging witch. She crossed the floor and put her arms around me and gave me a quick smooch. "Glad you're here," she said as she turned toward the back of the shop. "Some of these boxes are heavy." Maggie's shop was hit hard when the shit hit the fan last year. She lost everything and wasn't sure how she would or even if she could rebuild. But I stuck around and helped her out as best I could. It started off with me just helping her clean up the debris and scrubbing the walls, but it evolved into my being her partner. Somewhere along the way, I decided to stop being pig-headed and just admitted that I loved her. She took the news well. I didn't go back to my apartment for more than a week. I stopped off at my place to get my mail, I began. "I don't know why you don't just sell the place and move in here with me." The thought of waking up beside Maggie every morning was wonderful, but there were still a few aspects of her life I couldn't quite reconcile. I decided that now wasn't the right time to have the argument again. "I got something weird in my mailbox," I continued. "I don't know what it is, but I thought maybe you should take a look." "Sure thing." She plopped down on a stool behind the counter. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope and handed it to her. She frowned. "How'd this get in your mailbox?" "I don't know." She bent the tabs on the envelope and stuck her hand inside. The color drained from her face and her eyes went wide. Her jaw slacked and she began to breathe heavy. "What the hell is this?" she panted as she drew the plastic-covered pages out. "Don't know. I was hoping you could tell me." "There's so much power here," she gasped. "Raw, dark. I can feel it on my skin." She placed the package on the counter and unwrapped it as if she were handling a rare painting. There were 9 pages in all, stiff and crinkled, decorated with the same strange writing and the same rust-colored ink. All bore diagrams of people in various stages of dismemberment. On the last page, there was a drawing of a pair of eyes next to a disfigured man. This was in your mailbox? Mm-hmm. You ever hear anything like this? No, she said. I don't know what language it is, but man, someone put some serious hoodoo into these pages, and they don't feel like regular paper either. Why don't you, I closed my eyes. One of the first things Maggie taught me when I met her 6 years ago was how not to see the things that I could. When I met her, I couldn't turn it off or on. It just came and went. It was like spending half of my days on a bad acid trip and the other trying to convince myself that what I saw wasn't real. She taught me how to control my sight through willpower. I willed the doors in my mind to open, the walls to lower, and when I opened my eyes again, holy shit! I staggered backward. The pages in the book held power, that was a fact, but when Maggie said it was dark power, she couldn't have known just how dark or just how much energy there was. In the 9 pages before us, I saw energy, a thin corona of blue surrounded by a swollen mass of black flame. It was almost as if the book were possessed. More alarming, when I looked at Maggie, her hands seemed to be stained where she'd touched them. Her normally white and pink and yellow aura had smudges of black in it. Let him go, I said. Slapped them down to the countertop. Maggie looked hurt for a moment, but then her face changed to one of curiosity. It was black. It was so black. The energy radiating off those pages, it was marking you wherever you touched them. She stared at them for a minute. So, what do we do with them? I don't know, but I'd sure like to know why somebody sent them to me. Me too, she said. Maybe Evergreen could help. Evergreen. Strange and mystical society of coffee-drinking, bookstore-meeting, demon-trapping mystery men and women. They were made up of people from all different religions, the knowledge of which they used to try to keep balance in the world. Well, or at least in Pittsburgh. If there was something metaphysical going on in Steel City, chances were good that they already knew about it. But if they didn't, they'd want to. Give Bill a call, I nodded. Tell him I'll be over in a little while. Maggie nodded and hustled to the back of the shop. I stood there and stared at the grotesque images and rusty writing. As I tried to puzzle out who would possibly send me something so strange and dangerous. Oh, yeah, so strange and dangerous, period. The envelope contained no letter, no instructions, not even a postcard or a hastily scrawled note. The bell over the door sounded. A mop of curly dark hair peeked inside, followed by a pair of enormous green eyes and pale skin. I'm sorry, he said as he peered around the room. I think I'm in the right place. Is this the, Cast a nervous look over his shoulder. Witchcraft shop. Yep, I said. Come on in, you're in the right place. What followed his head was dressed in black, down to his canvas Chuck Taylors. He was skinny and tall, 2 things I'd never been, and looked nervous as a cat. Most people who visited Maggie's shop knew what it was and knew what they were looking for. And for the most part, only serious practitioners of the craft visited. The fad crafters could go down the street to a half-dozen other shops for their bumper stickers and love potions. People that came here were looking for herbs that only Maggie could find, or handmade grimoires, or energy-charged oils or candles. The lanky kid couldn't have been more than 16 years old, and he seemed scared out of his mind, like he was sure that at any moment the cage would drop from the ceiling and I'd drag him into the back and use his boiled carcass to make flying ointment. Apart from how ridiculous such a thing was, it would also be bad for business. I didn't tell him that. In fact, I stayed very quiet while he looked from shelf to shelf, skirting around the outside of the store, casting nervous glances toward me every so often. I left a message for Bill, said Maggie as she came through the curtain. He said he'll call me as soon as he Oh, hi. The boy went rigid the moment he saw her, all the nervousness replaced by abject terror. I seen the same look on other boys' faces the first time they meet Maggie. Hell, I've worn it myself when we first met. I wasn't afraid she'd eat me or turn me into a toad. I was terrified she'd actually talk to me. The more beautiful the woman, the more intimidated a lot of guys become. And Maggie was not only beautiful, she had the confidence to stare down the Sphinx. She made her way around the corner and over to him, with her most winning smile on her face and her hand outstretched. I know she meant to be warm and welcoming, but to a terrified male being greeted by someone like Maggie, it's like coming face to face with a Playboy playmate. I'm surprised he didn't piss his pants. "What's your name?" she said. Seth. "You can call me Electra," she said. Behind the counter, I groaned, again with the magical name bullshit. Way back when witches were persecuted and put to death for their beliefs, what most of them erroneously referred to as the burning times, practitioners of the craft met in secret and used names other than their own to keep themselves safe. But here, in the 21st century, there wasn't much of a need for such things, especially if a person was prepared to walk into a shop like Maggie's in broad daylight. Still, some people swore by such a practice, so who was I to judge? "If there's anything I can help you with," she said, ignoring me, "you let me know." She turned toward me and twisted her upper lip to let me know she'd heard me. "Actually," said the just Seth, "there is something I'm looking for." "Sure," she said, leading him to the counter. "What do you need?" "Well," he seemed to be searching for the right words, ones that wouldn't make us laugh him out of the shop. I wanted to tell him not to worry, that we'd heard it all before and that we wouldn't laugh at him, but before I could, he took a deep breath and blurted, "The, Necronomicon?" And I was wrong. It took a moment for what he said to sink in, then I turned and walked quickly through the back curtain before I collapsed in a fit of giggles. Every so often, a kid just beginning to dabble in the occult stumbled across the collected works of H.P. Lovecraft. In them, he or she found references to a strange tome written by an insane Arab in 748 A.D., bound in human flesh, inked in blood, and containing the secrets to unlocking such powerful arcane mojo that whoever read it would become a dark god themselves and be damned for all eternity in the bargain. These same kids scanned the internet until they found crackpots who claimed the book was real and they'd actually seen it, only to have it whisked away by some dark conspiracy. There's only one problem. Those people are full of shit. The Necronomicon doesn't exist. It never existed. Lovecraft himself admitted as much countless times, but that didn't deter the ones who wanted to believe. In fact, several fiction publishers contracted writers to come up with their own Necronomicons to cash in on Lovecraft's mysterious tome of forbidden knowledge. So every now and again, some terrified teenager with dreams of getting back at the world for some great wrong, real or imagined, would go on a hunt for the fictitious tome, only to wind up in a shop like Maggie's where the harsh truth would be revealed. Kid's lucky someone as nice and gentle as Maggie was the one who broke the news to him. I once gave a kid the old, "I had it, but a man in black took it just before you got here." Yeah, Maggie wasn't amused. It took me a few moments to compose myself before I went out, just catching the tail end of Maggie's lesson in literature to the boy. I could tell she was as gentle as she could be, but his face was still crimson with embarrassment, and he wouldn't meet her eyes as she spoke. When she was done, she offered him a few books on real magic, offered to answer any questions, and he thanked her for her kindness and took the books. He also bought a few candles, one of which I noted was for drawing love. At the register, he still wouldn't look directly at Maggie or me. She rang up his purchases and handed him the receipt, and as he reached for his bag, his eyes locked on the strange pages on the counter. Are those? Art, I said, as I scooped them up and tucked them back in the envelope. From a class at Pitt. His eyes met mine for a moment, and in them I saw a terrified boy, but also anger. He snatched up his bag and rushed out of the shop. Maggie sighed as the door banged shut behind him. Well, that went well. Hey, better I set him straight than he gets sucked into one of those Necronomicon cults. She wasn't angry, but there was an edge to her voice, letting me know that, funny as it was, she still respected the kid's feelings. The telephone rang and Maggie snatched it from its charger. "Bill?" I could hear the old man's genial voice from the speaker. "Okay, I'll send him right over." I put the envelope in my shoulder bag and headed toward the door. "He's waiting at the coffee shop at the end of the block." "Why can't he meet us here?" I asked. "He's on his lunch break." The coffee shop is halfway between him and us. I stepped out into the warm summer air, and my mind boggled at the concept that Bill of Evergreen actually had a job. I mean, sure, he was a normal guy, but it seemed hard to fathom that such a powerful elder of the metaphysical community would actually have a 9-to-5-er. Somehow I still pictured him living in a cave lit by torches and doing nothing all day but changing lead into gold and thinking really deep thoughts. I'd barely gone a block when someone struck me from behind and knocked me to the sidewalk. I hit hard, banged my knee and my elbow on the way down, and my face slapped off the concrete. For a moment, I saw little bright flashes of light, and then I saw a pair of black Chuck Taylors in front of my face. Just Seth snatched my bag and took off down the street, running as fast as his lanky legs could carry him. I staggered to my feet and gave chase. Yeah, that was futile. At my age and shape, my days of distance running are over, especially if I'm chasing a skinny kid. I tried to get into shape a while ago. I even took up jogging. I figured that if I was going to be chased by demons or monsters, it might be good to be able to outrun them. All it did, however, was make me sore, miserable, and sweaty. It took all of 2 weeks for me to give it up, and as I watched the kid disappear around the corner, I almost regretted quitting. Almost. I hobbled down the street, got to the corner a full minute and a half after he turned it. Sitting there on the sidewalk was my bag, now empty. I snatched it off the ground and limped back down the block to my car. To hell with walking, I decided. My knee hurt too bad, and so did my face. I didn't even care about the stolen mail, but he didn't have to knock me down to get it. I climbed into my car and checked my face in the vanity mirror. My bushy hair looked as out of control as it ever did, but the flesh under my right eye was beginning to darken, as was my cheek. Perfect. The little shit gave me a shiner. I cursed under my breath as I backed out. So that's the first chapter of Pages. I was told that I should open up the last part of this to question and answer. Does anybody have any questions? Or I could just tell you a ghost story or two.
Ghost story.
Tell us a local ghost story.
Tell you a local ghost. I'll tell you one that will really that you can appreciate. Do you remember Lindsay Trask?
Yes.
Lindsay Trask was a graduate student in the Department of English back when I worked there, and I wrote a series of articles about real haunted places in the U.S., and everybody knew what I did, so it was not uncommon for people to show up at my office door with spooky stories to tell. And so one day, Lindsay came to my office and she said, I need your help. I said, okay, come in, sit down, talk to me. She says, there's something wrong with my house, with my apartment that I live in. I said, why? What's happening? She says, well, I keep getting locked out. I said, big deal, you're a dingbat. She said, yeah, okay, I do leave my keys in the house, but the lock that keeps locking is a double key deadbolt. You have to have a key on both sides to turn it, so how is it locking without my key in it? I said, I don't know, you got me. She said, and I keep losing stuff too, like my glasses will disappear and that kind of thing. I said, once again, nothing weird about that. I know you, Lindsay. She says, yeah, well, last night was the worst night of my life. She said, I was laying in my bed and I was trying to go to sleep, and I heard the door to my room open. And then I heard someone walk into the room. I felt them sit down on the bed next to me. And then I felt fingers running through the back of my hair. She said, when I turned over, there was nobody there. I said, you now have my full attention. She said, and besides that, the house is just weird. It's like they couldn't level anything when they put the house together, because the floor of my room is all slanted down on one side and there's holes on the wall. And I stopped her. I said, wait, you live on San Antonio Street, don't you? Her eyes got very, very big. And she said, how did you know that? I said, Lindsay, the house that you're living in, that's the old funeral home. And the room with the slanted floor, it's supposed to be like that. That's the embalming room. The holes in the wall are drain holes, and that's your bedroom, sweetie. And she moved out 2 days later. I don't know if that has anything to do with me or not. But we have a few ghost stories here on campus, too. There's a wonderful ghost story, 3 of them actually, about Old Main. Has 3 stories. One of them is blatantly a lie. One of them is sort of true. The other one, I'm inclined to believe, is very true. Now, the blatant lie is that the ghost of Lyndon Baines Johnson haunts the halls of Old Main. The man was a president. I'm sure that even in the afterlife, he has more important things to do. Round about 1986, there was a rash of reports of things being moved around in the building late at night, and they got the reputation of there being a ghost in Old Main. And if you look it up in the University Star, you can find this. You can actually find the old reports of this. And it went on for an entire year until a few intrepid university police officers figured out that there was, in fact, a homeless guy living in the attic of the building. And at night, he would come down and he would rifle through people's stuff and go back up and be very quiet during the day. But the story that's true, round about, well, I don't know really, round about the 1920s. Has anybody in here seen the movie DOA with Meg Ryan and Dennis Quaid? Okay, that movie was actually shot on this campus, and part of it was shot in Old Main before it was renovated. So if you look at it, if you watch this movie, you can see Old Main before they added the ceiling on the second floor. It used to be open all the way from the first floor up to the roof. So in about 1920, there was a young woman that was walking through the halls, and she fell from the top floor and died. I've spoken to every cleaning crew that's ever been in that building, and they all tell a very similar, very strange story of a young woman wearing 1920s style clothing, running up and down the halls with books clutched to her chest, still trying to get to class. I actually know a few custodians that won't go into that building after dark. So we do have places like that all over, so. Yes?
Have you ever seen a ghost?
Funny you should ask that. I've been hunting ghosts for a long time. I have had things thrown at me. I've been pushed. I've been burned. And not by my wife. But I will say this. My wife and I, my wife is actually sitting right there. She is my partner in crime. So when I go on a ghost hunt, she goes with me. And we were doing an investigation on a bar in Pennsylvania. And we had a group, I was actually teaching at Waynesburg University at the time, and I had a summer course on ghost stories and literature. And I had a grand total of 6 students. So I thought, for the last part of the class, what the cool thing to do would be take them on a real ghost hunt and let them scare the hell out of each other, right? So we go to this bar that I thought the stories about it sounded like urban legend, so I didn't expect to find anything. So Tabby took 3 of them downstairs, and I took the other 3 upstairs. She was downstairs for about less than 5 minutes, and she came running up the stairs, and she says, "Something got me." I said, "What are you talking about?" She lifted up her hair, and on her neck were 6 long, bloody scratches. And with me standing here with a video camera on it, and 6 students here, 3 more appeared on this side. And we got it on film. And my wife, being the person that she is, normal people would run like hell at that point. My wife, being the person that she is, turned around and walked right back down the stairs and went, "Who the hell scratched me?" And I stood at the top of the stairs going, "That's my girl." Yeah. So to answer your question, I've had a lot of very strange paranormal experiences. In fact, my first book was inspired by a real house that's actually here in San Marcos. It's a house I used to live in. And a funny thing about that, we were getting all kinds of very strange experiences in the house. One of my favorite ones was we had you guys know what a baby monitor is? Yeah, a little radio thing, stick it in the kids' room, right? So my wife and I would listen to my youngest daughter sleep because she snored, and it's cute, and we're nerdy that way. So one night we were laying in bed, and we were about to go to sleep, and over the baby monitor we heard, "Who's a pretty girl?" And I got up and I ran into the bedroom with a baseball bat in my hand, and there was nobody there. My youngest, however, was sitting up in her crib, pointing at an empty corner in the ceiling and giggling. And I said, "You're sleeping with Mommy and Daddy tonight, aren't you?" So And we were actually living in this house until my parents could move to town and take over possession of the house. They wanted us to live there because, you know, to insure it, and all I heard was free rent. So, when my mom and dad moved into the house, I tried to tell them. I said to my dad, it's kind of a funny story, Dad. I think there's something in your house. I think the house is haunted. And my dad said, that's bullshit. So, okay. I went to my mom, said, Mom, I think the house is haunted. That's nice, dear. Okay, fine. So they've been living in the house for less than 3 months when I got a wonderful phone call. It's one of the best phone calls I ever gotten in my life. It was my dad, and all he said was, okay, I saw it. Here's your mother. And handed the phone off. What apparently had happened was my dad had gone into the spare bedroom and was going to take a nap. Why in the spare bedroom? I don't know. He's my dad. He's weird. Don't ask. But he sat down on the bed, and when he looked up, he saw what he described as a shadow. But it wasn't on the wall. It was out in the middle of the room like a column of smoke. And he watched as it walked from this door, across the room, and out the other door. And suddenly, Dad wasn't tired. Dad decided to get up and mow the lawn. So they had all kinds of very strange experiences in that house, but that's the house that inspired my first book. So.
Where's that house? Where's that house?
You know, the couple that lived there would really hate it if I told you. They would be very grumpy. But it's in the historic district here in San Marcos. So, yeah. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Where's the creepiest place you ever investigated?
Creepiest place I've ever investigated? That's a really good question. Well, we were, my paranormal group was actually the last group to legally enter the old Pike House. And we did an investigation there. That was pretty darn creepy. I don't know, I judge creepy in a very different way because, like, if my life was a horror movie, I'd be the guy that dies first. Because I'm the guy that's like, ooh, a weird noise. That's totally me. I'm the guy that would read out loud from a strange book. I'm the guy that would go into the basement. I'm that idiot. So I'd die before the opening credits were over, man. I'd be the guy that dies before the credits even start, just to let you know what kind of movie's going on. So, yeah, creepy to me is not really I guess the Pike House would be the most creepy place I've ever done. So, although the most dangerous one I'd have to say would be the bar where Tabby got scratched. But, yeah. Anything else?
What was creepy about the Pike House?
Well, there's something about walking into a place that used to be inhabited and find it completely decayed. There's something about walking in and finding that in just a few short years, the whole place is rotted. That and there were phantom footsteps all over the place, and we got a few really interesting EVPs. EVP is electronic voice phenomena. It's where you walk into a room with a voice recorder and you ask questions to nobody and you feel really stupid while you're doing it. And then you go back home and you listen to it and you get answers to your questions occasionally. So in one instance in the Pike House, I asked the question, what is it that you want? Didn't hear anything. I got home and I heard a very distinct male voice say, pay us attention. My wife, and actually there's another member of the team is actually here. It's Heather sitting right there. They were in a room doing an EVP session, and Heather heard a noise. And she says, was that you? To Tabby. Tabby did not say anything. She didn't answer her. She just shook her head. When we got home and we played it back, we hear Heather's voice very distinctly say, was that you? Could be. Now, I want you to picture this person standing next to my head and screaming her head off when she heard that, and me going, But yeah, so. Any other questions?
I have a writing question. Oh, wait. Yeah. And with your busy schedule, how do you find time to write?
I make time. I make time. Here's a list of the things that I do, okay? First and foremost, husband and father. I always take time for my kids, always take time for my wife. I cook dinner sometimes, you know. So I do that. I work here full-time as a technician. I am the nerd in the basement. I'm the assistant coach of the Texas State University karate team. I work with those guys every week. I write for a horror news website called Dread Central. And I do all of that, and then I sit down and I write. And I set a schedule. I write 1,000 words every day, come hell or high water. And I don't stop until I do, which means some nights I'm up until 4 o'clock. Some nights it comes real easy and I'm in bed by 11. I love those nights. But the ones till I'm up till 4, you know. I actually shot my mouth off to my agent and wound up having to write an entire 90,000 word novel in 2 months. And I did it, and she liked it. I wouldn't recommend trying it because I was on sleep deprivation. None of my friends saw me for those 2 months. They were calling, going, "Is he alive?" You know. So drank a whole lot of coffee, but yeah. So I make time. Yes.
Where do you draw most of your material now after writing so many books?
From everywhere. Everywhere and everybody. One of my biggest inspirations is sitting here right beside my wife. My wife and my oldest daughter, my biggest inspirations. My youngest daughter, who apparently inherited my sense of humor, she's another one. I mean, if you've ever come into contact with me, chances are very likely that you're going to wind up in one of my books. And, you know, if I really like you, I'll kill you really horribly. It's how I show love. So, but yeah, I mean, I draw inspiration from all over the place. I mean, I have this weird thing. I love to research urban legends. I love to research religions. I love to research, you know, the occult. I love going in and researching all of this really weird stuff that has absolutely no practical use, like poisons that you know of, like poisons. Yeah, when would I need that? So, but yeah, and I saw another question over here. Yes.
If I wanted to find any kind of paranormal activity in San Marcos without trespassing, what would you recommend?
Without trespassing? Well, without trespassing, the first thing that you see, the first thing that we did was we find out who owns all the places that we go look at, and then we call them and we say, you know, can we please have permission to go in? And if they say no, then you know.
We respect their decision.
What she said.
Do you
Yes.
Do you ever do cemeteries, or is it raucous?
I don't really, I've done a few cemeteries, but I don't really do them very often because it's, you know, people don't typically hang around, ghosts don't typically hang around cemeteries. That's just where you put the shell. You know, they typically hang around where they died or where they really enjoyed life. Yeah, wouldn't do that. I'll tell you what, though, one of my favorite ghost stories turned out to not really be a ghost story. It turned out to be a house that was haunted by someone who was still alive. There's a family that moved into a house, and I think it was in New England, but in the New England area. But they kept seeing this little girl in the upstairs of the house playing with toys that weren't there. And they saw her every darn day. And they started researching who owned the house, and they found out that there was an old woman that used to live in the house. She was in her 90s. And they called her, and she came to the house, and she walked in, and she looked up, and she says, "And right here is where I used to play. And this is where my toy chest was." And she had an old picture with her that she took out, and damned if she wasn't the little girl. So what that told me was that, you know, there was so much joy at living in that house that it left an impression, kind of like a scar, stain, or whatever you want to call it, but it left that impression there. So, but yeah.
When did you know you wanted to be a writer?
That's really funny you should mention that. I never wanted to be a writer. Not until I got into the class with Miles. And the class with Miles was a workshop class. And the way that works is you write a story, you hand it out to, or you hand it into the professor. He copies it, hands it out to everybody else in the room. They go away, mark it up, and then they come back and tell you what they thought, right? So, as I said, the first story I wrote was about a guy who woke up in the middle of the night and found his whole family been butchered. And for some reason, when we came back to class, nobody wanted to sit next to me. And that's true. That's a true statement. And I thought, well, that's really very strange and very cool, and I wonder if I could do it again. And so the next story I wrote was about a guy who beat up a mime in Central Park. And then mimes come out of everywhere and drag him under Central Park to Mime Court, where they turn him into a mime and sentence him to life in the invisible box. That was my second short story I'd ever written, and that was my first published piece. And I went, really? I tell these goofy stories, I can do this? And so when I wrote my first book, my train of thought literally was, I wonder if I could write a book. And I did, and that's my first book, and it got picked up by a publisher. So, I mean, I'm not that good. I'm insanely lucky. I'm insanely lucky. So, yes, Jack.
Yeah, it so happens I was in that class with you.
Uh-huh.
And I remember reading your first short story. I remember something about intestines hanging from the ceiling fan.
Yeah. For the kids. Now, when I was in John's class, it was a class on travel writing. And the first two pieces that I had in his class, one of them, the assignment was to write a memory. And what I wrote was a memory of my grandfather sitting by his radio. And I remember that very vividly. That was the first piece I wrote. And then he said, the class wasn't on travel writing, but it was a creative writing class. And I remember this because I had the class right before lunch and you kept bringing in food magazines. And I thought, how mean could you be? Because there was like creme brulee and all this stuff, and I'm going, oh no. But the second thing I wrote in his class was a travel piece on visiting my hometown, which is a swamp in South Texas. And I don't think I gave it a very good review of the town, but you know, my overall impression of it was gray skies and hanging willows and that kind of thing. But John and Miles both were the two guys that said, you know, maybe you should keep doing this. Maybe you should continue with this. And, you know, that was that. You know, I had to. So, yes?
What's your take on quantum physics?
I take it with, oh, gee, look at the time.
String theory, parallel.
Yeah.
I know you've read some on that.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that to make any kind of a intelligent statement at all. Yeah, thank you for the stress question, though. That was good.
Tell me, how do you feel about the plight of the children in Ethiopia?
Yeah. Jeez.
You read Michael Crichton?
Yeah, no, yeah, I have, and he's very Michael Crichton-ish. How's that? Anything else, folks? Any other questions? Well, I would like to close this by saying that I appreciate you all coming out, and reading here is, honestly, it's a real high point for me, because I've always wanted to read for the Wittliff collection, and this is a real honor for me, and for a horror guy, for a horror writer like me, to be standing here where the Cormac McCarthy collection is. Holy cow! For a guy like me to be standing here is beyond words. One of the greatest experiences that I could have. So I'd like to thank you guys for sharing it with me, and thank you for coming. So.